Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to be continuing this series where we take a look at common mistakes that low elo players make. So I've done one of these for top lane and for jungle before, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at around 10 common mistakes that most low elo mid laners make. So the first tip here has to do with freezing in the mid lane, and it's that most players just don't know how to freeze or when to set up a freeze. And for the mid lane, how you're going to set up a freeze is that if the enemy wave does have 4 or more minions, like around 4 or more minions than your wave does, what you can do is you can drag the minion wave down towards the river bush, and by doing this you're just going to prevent the wave from crashing into your tower, and you can just go in and out of the bush to attract the aggro from the minion wave, and you can do this and it'll just keep the wave from crashing into your tower. So that's generally how you do want to look to set up a freeze in the mid lane. Now, the most common scenario to where I find you'll be able to set up a freeze in the mid lane is when you get a base in, you come back to lane, and the enemy isn't able to shove their wave into your tower. Now, the enemy, if they're low on HP, if they're low on mana, then this is the time that you can look to freeze. So you can look to just drag the wave down to the bush. If the enemy can contest you for the wave, like if they're still full health, if they're still full mana, then obviously in that situation you can't really freeze because they could just kill you if you try to drag the wave down. But if they need to get a base in, if they're low on HP, low on mana, then that's a great time to look to set up a freeze. You can also look to freeze even if you haven't based yet. So even if you're not coming back from a base, you can still look to freeze, but it's generally not the best because even though you can set up a freeze and even though you can deny the enemy some gold and XP from doing it, if they come back to lane and they're full HP and full mana and you're not full HP and you're not full mana, even though you set up a freeze, you're not really going to be able to get priority in lane. You're not really going to be able to do a ton. So it's usually just best to set up a freeze when you've come back from a base. Now, as for when you should look to set up a freeze, if you let your jungler know that you're going to freeze the wave and you can tell him to come over and come for a gank, then that's a great time to look to set up a freeze because the enemy is going to have to move very aggressively up in lane. He's going to be in a vulnerable position, so it should be pretty easy for your jungler to get a gank off. Also, if you just want to play safe in lane, like if you've fallen behind in the early game, you don't really want to be moving out too far in lane because you don't have any vision, then that's also a good time to try to get a freeze. Now, you don't want to freeze though if you do have really good roam potential. Like if you're already really far ahead in your lane, then it's usually not best to freeze because you want to be influencing the map. You don't just want to be sitting in your lane. Also, if your jungler is playing aggressively, if he's looking to aggressively invade, or if he's looking to make a dive play on the other side of the map, then you don't really want to be freezing in that situation either. So number 2 is that a lot of players don't know if they should follow the enemy's roams or if they should stay in lane. So generally speaking, you should look to follow roams if you do have vision in the river and you can win a skirmish. If you don't have any vision in the river and you don't know like where the enemy jungler is, you don't know where the enemy mid laner is, then roaming is definitely very risky in that situation, especially if the enemy is playing like an assassin champion or a really good 1v1 champion. If you don't know where they are, it's going to be best for you to just stay mid and look to spam ping, like use your spam danger pings on your bot lane or on your top lane depending on where the enemy mid is roaming. And I think that a lot of the times players like they'll get flamed for not roaming down bot lane to help their bot lane, but if you don't have any vision, if you cannot like walk into the river without risking yourself dying, then you just can't roam, and even if your bot lane flames you, you can't really do anything in that situation. So just look to stay mid, look to pressure the tower if the enemy mid roams and you can't follow, and as long as you can like pressure tower, shove the wave in, deny him some CS, then it's not the end of the world. Now, vice versa though, if you are strong in the early game, if you're playing a strong mid lane champion and your jungler's also playing a strong early game jungler, then you should look to follow the roam. Like it all depends on the scenario, it all depends on the matchup and the vision that you do have in the river. And then also, if you only notice the enemy mid is missing when he's actually showing up in the other lane, so he's either showing up in top lane or showing up in bot lane, then you shouldn't try to match the roam in that situation. A lot of players will think that when the enemy mid shows up in a different lane, they should just leave lane immediately and go try to help their team. But by the time you get down there, chances are you're not going to be able to get anything out of the play, and it's almost always best to just take the higher percentage play, stay mid lane, go for some tower plating, go go for just keep up your CS, deny the enemy CS, and by roaming bot lane, if you get nothing out of it, if the play is already done by the time you get down there, then you've just wasted a ton of time in the mid lane where you could have been getting some pressure on the enemy mid's tower. So number 3 is that a lot of players don't strategically place their pink wards, and they kind of just place them in the same spot every game, and they don't really think about why they're placing their pink ward there. So almost always you want to be placing your pink ward to the side of the map you want to be playing around. So for example, if your bot lane gets first blood, if they get a few kills in the early game, then you want to be placing your pink ward towards bot side. Try to play around bot side as much as you can, so get a pink ward in the bot side river pixel bush there, and just by doing this, it's going to allow you to have vision so that when you want to roam yourself and you want to help your bot lane out and continue to snowball their lane even more, you can walk into the river without going in blind and without having no vision. So just try to plant your pinks towards the side of the lane you do want to play around. So number 4 is that a lot of players don't really understand what the Fog of War can do for you in the early game. So if you get a shove and you shove the enemy into their tower and they're just CSing under tower, if you don't have kill pressure on them and you can't really look to poke them anymore, then don't just sit in lane, don't just sit in vision of the enemy mid laner and so they know where you are. Look to dip down into the bush, dip into the Fog of War to where they can't see you, and by doing this, even if you don't end up roaming, even if you don't end up making a play somewhere around the map, it's pressure on the map, and the enemy mid laner will be spamming missing pings, the enemy bot lane won't be able to play aggressive, or the enemy top laner won't be able to play as aggressively because there's a threat of you roaming over to that lane. So just oftentimes the threat of you roaming by going into the Fog of War is even better than you roaming yourself. And then you can also use this time to look to ward as well. So you can look to go into the enemy's jungle a little bit or get a deeper ward down. You can just look to scout out and see where the enemy jungler could be on the map. So just use this time wisely when you do shove the enemy into their tower, because there's a lot of different things you can be doing other than just sitting mid. So next up here is a really important one, and that is most players don't communicate, or they don't really know their early game skirmishing potential with their junglers. So I think this is really important here because getting Scuttle Crab in the early game is so important in this current meta, and a lot of the time both junglers are going to try to go for the Scuttle Crab. So games are sometimes completely won or lost over that Scuttle Crab fight. So you want to be letting your jungler know, like in the early game, if you're playing a weaker early game mid lane champion, you want to let him know that you can't really look to get priority in lane and you can't look to contest Scuttle Crab. And then vice versa, if you're playing a strong early game champion, let your jungler know that you'll be able to shove the wave in, look to roam over, and help him contest for Scuttle Crab. So just as an example here, like if you're playing Yi and Malzahar and the enemy team has an Udyr and a LeBlanc, then you should not be looking to contest Scuttle Crab. You should just tell your Master Yi to look to farm his jungle if he can. Now obviously if you notice that Udyr is on one Scuttle Crab and the Master Yi can go for the other one, then that's fine in that situation, but you just don't want to be looking to go for those 2v2 skirmishes over a crab or look to fight over it if you are playing a weaker early game champion. So number 6 is that a lot of players don't really think about why they're positioning in the spot they are in the lane, and they just kind of like sit in lane in a random spot. But you want to really be thinking about like where you should be positioning in lane depending on a few different things. So if you do have vision more so on one side of the map than the other, you do want to be trying to hug that side of the lane a little bit more than the other side. Also, if you notice that your jungler is on one side of the map, then it's best to try to play towards that side as well. If you do notice that the enemy jungler, for example, is top side, then you want to be playing more so towards bot side. So you just always want to be hugging one side of the lane more so than the other, depending on what vision you have and depending on what information you have on where the enemy jungler is or where your jungler is on the map. So this next one here is one that I have featured in one of my previous videos, so if you have seen this one before, you can just skip ahead a little bit, but I do think it's a very important one to go over for this video. So it's that most players don't really know when to base during the laning phase, and if you are even or ahead in lane, you almost always want to try to be timing your bases when the cannon wave is arriving. Now, the cannon wave is going to arrive on every third wave, so you can kind of, after a while, know when the cannon wave is going to be arriving. It does take a little bit of of time, but once you understand when the cannon wave will be arriving, you want to shove the wave in before the cannon wave, get a hard shove on that wave, and then base on the cannon wave. So by doing this, if you base on the cannon wave, it's going to give you a lot more time to get back to lane, because the enemy, it's going to take him a lot longer to clear out the cannon minion and shove that wave into your tower. Your tower is also going to take a lot longer to kill the cannon minion because it's going to be able to tank a lot of tower shots. So it just gives you a lot more time to get back to lane, and you're going to lose a lot less XP and you're going to lose a lot less gold by timing your bases like this. So number 8 is that most players don't position in lane according to what abilities the enemy has. So if the enemy is playing a champion that has a skill shot that can go through minions, then you always want to be trying to position yourself outside of the minion wave. So you don't want to try to be standing inside the wave, because if you do this, then you're going to allow the enemy to have the potential of hitting your wave and also hitting you as well. And if they can do this, if they can poke you out and they can also match your shove, then they're getting the best of both worlds out of that situation. So you always want to make the enemy decide whether or not they should match your shove or if they should poke you, and you never want to allow them to be able to shove the wave and also poke you at the same time. And if the enemy does have a skill shot that can't go through minions, then you do want to try to position yourself behind your minion wave. So a champion like Jace with Jace Q, Ryze Q, Talia Q, Veigar Q, Zoe Q, all these Q abilities that can't go through minions, then you want to try to be playing around your minions, play around them, stay behind them so you don't get hit by those skill shot abilities. So number 9 is that a lot of players don't play around cooldowns and they don't punish the enemy's cooldowns enough in the early game. So this is especially important for mid lane in my opinion, because a lot of mid lane champions, they rely a ton on their abilities in order to win trades and in order to be a champion during the laning phase. So for example, here I got one on screen to where if you're playing against an enemy Lux and she misses her E or she uses her abilities on the minion wave, then just look to zone her or look to trade with her. If she does back off, then just continue to look to zone her and deny her CS. If she doesn't back off, then look to get a free trade-off on her. Also another one, if you're playing against Zed for example, and he uses his W and he misses like both his Qs on you, then look to play aggressive after that. The W cooldown is very long and he's definitely not as strong without that, so look to zone him, look to trade with him when those high priority abilities are down during the laning phase. And then number 10 here, this is one I have had in some previous videos as well, but super important for mid lane, and that is you should be warding Pixel Bush at a minute 10 to a minute 20 every single game. You want to be doing this because it allows you to track the enemy jungler in the early game. It allows you to have knowledge on where he's going to be pathing and where he's looking to go. So just always look to grab a ward in either Pixel Bush in the early game. And then lastly, to round out the video here, the last one is going to be that most players don't really know what to do when all outer turrets drop, and a lot of the time what's going to happen is that everyone's just going to group up together. You're just going to get an ARAM, you're just going to group up and you're just going to be sharing XP for a ton of time, you're going to be sharing gold, and depending on what champion you're playing, you're going to want to do something different. So if you are playing a poke mage, if you're playing a mage champion, then you almost always do want to stay mid, and you don't want to look to like go to a side lane, because unless you are a mage that is very strong in the 1v1, so if you are playing someone like a Ryze or a LeBlanc, then those champions can side lane. But if you're playing someone like a Xerath, a Vel'Koz, a Ziggs, then you almost always just want to be staying grouped up with your team, even if your whole team does group with you. Now, if you are playing an assassin pick though, someone like a Zed, a Talon, a Fizz, then you do want to look to just try to go to a side lane, shove out that side lane, and then after you've done that, either look to collapse on mid after you shoved it out, or look to continue pressuring. If the enemy is not, or if the enemy team is not responding to your split push, then you can continue to split. But the best thing to do a lot of the time on assassin picks is to just try to get the side wave shoving, and then look to roam over and collapse on mid and try to get a pick on mid lane. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. I think that was 11 tips there, or 11 common mistakes that low elo mid laners make. So hopefully this video did help you out. Hopefully this video did give you some useful information. So if it did, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.